For centuries, the valley was alive with water. In northern Israel, between the mountains and the Sea of Galilee, the Hula Valley was once one of the most important wetlands in the Middle East. Seasonal floods spread across vast marshes. Shallow lakes supported fish, birds, insects, and plants in staggering numbers. Millions of migratory birds passed through every year. The valley absorbed water, filtered it, and released it slowly downstream. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, the water disappeared. What followed was one of the most dramatic environmental transformations in the region and one of its most important reversals. When the State of Israel was established in 1948, the Hula Valley was seen less as an ecosystem and more as a problem. The wetlands were associated with malaria, the land was difficult to farm, flooding was unpredictable. Water was viewed as something to be controlled, not preserved. At the time, draining wetlands was considered progress. Between the early 1950s and the late 1950s, large-scale drainage projects reshaped the valley. Channels were dug, rivers were straightened, the shallow Lake Hula was drained almost completely, marshes dried out. What had once been waterlogged land was converted into agricultural fields. The transformation worked at first. Malaria declined rapidly, new farmland appeared, crops were planted. The project was celebrated as a triumph of human engineering over nature. The Hula Valley became a symbol of national development and control. But the success did not last. Within a few years, unexpected problems began to surface. The peat soil that lay beneath the wetlands had formed over thousands of years under waterlogged conditions. Once exposed to air, it began to oxidize and decompose. The ground subsided, fields sank unevenly, cracks opened, fires broke out underground, smoldering for months beneath the surface. Nutrients that had once been trapped in wet soil washed downstream. Nitrogen and phosphorus flowed into the Jordan River and eventually into the Sea of Galilee, Israel's most important freshwater reservoir. Algal blooms increased, water quality declined. What had been solved upstream became a crisis downstream. Biodiversity collapsed, fish disappeared, amphibians vanished, many bird species stopped coming. The valley, once alive with movement and sound, became quiet. The ecosystem that had regulated itself for millennia had been dismantled in less than a decade. By the 1970s, it was clear that draining the valley had created more problems than it solved. Israel faced a difficult realization. The Hula Valley was not broken by water, it was broken by its absence. The solution was not to undo everything, but to rethink the relationship between land, water, and life. Restoration began slowly. In the 1990s, Israel launched the Hula Project, a long-term effort to stabilize the valley, reduce pollution, and restore parts of the wetland ecosystem. This was not a return to the past. The original wetlands could not be fully recreated. Agriculture was now permanent. Infrastructure was in place. The challenge was balance. The first step was water. Instead of draining water away as quickly as possible, engineers began retaining it. Controlled flooding was reintroduced in selected areas. A new shallow lake, Lake Agman, was created to act as a buffer between farmland and the Jordan River. This lake absorbed excess nutrients, trapped sediment, and slowed water flow. It became a biological filter, protecting downstream water quality while reintroducing wetland conditions locally. The peat soil stabilized. By keeping soil moist, oxidation slowed. Subsidence decreased. Underground fires became rare. The land stopped collapsing. What had once been a liability became manageable again. Then life began to return. Aquatic plants recolonized the shallow waters. Insects followed. Fish reappeared. Amphibians returned to breeding sites that had been dry for decades. But the most visible change came from the sky. Birds began to return. The Hula Valley sits on one of the world's major migratory flyways. For centuries, it served as a critical resting and feeding point between Europe, Asia, and Africa. When the wetlands disappeared, birds were forced to bypass the region or risk starvation. As water returned, so did the birds, first in small numbers, then in waves. Cranes, pelicans, storks, and countless other species began stopping again in the valley. Today, hundreds of millions of birds pass through the Hula Valley annually. Some stay for weeks, others breed. The valley once again functions as a biological crossroads. This created a new challenge. Large flocks of birds, particularly cranes, caused damage to nearby crops. Fields were trampled, grain was consumed. Farmers who had already endured decades of change faced new losses. The restoration could not succeed if agriculture collapsed. Israel responded with an unusual solution. Instead of chasing birds away, the project began feeding them. Designated feeding areas were created away from crops. Grain was supplied strategically to keep birds concentrated in specific zones. This reduced damage while maintaining the valley's role as a migration hub. It was not a perfect solution, but it worked. Farmers adapted, tourism grew, birdwatchers arrived from around the world. The valley became both productive and alive, economically and ecologically. Importantly, the restoration of the Hula Valley was not driven by ideology. It was driven by necessity. Water quality had to be protected, soil had to be stabilized, flooding had to be controlled. Biodiversity recovery was not an abstract goal, it was a functional requirement. The project relied on constant monitoring. Water levels were adjusted seasonally, nutrient flows were measured, bird populations were tracked. When problems appeared, management changed. The valley became a living experiment in adaptive restoration. This flexibility was crucial. The Hula Valley could not simply be left alone. Too much had changed. Instead, it required continuous intervention, but of a different kind than before. Not elimination, but moderation. Not drainage, but regulation. The restored wetlands now act as shock absorbers. During heavy rains, they absorb floodwater. During dry periods, they release moisture slowly. Nutrients are captured before reaching sensitive water bodies. The system is not wild in the original sense, but it is functional. The contrast with the past is stark. Draining the valley was fast, decisive, and irreversible. Restoring it was slow, careful, and incomplete, but it proved far more resilient. The lesson of the Hula Valley is not that humans should never intervene in nature. It is that intervention without understanding creates fragile systems. The original drainage project treated water as an enemy. The restoration treated water as infrastructure, something to be managed, not removed. Today, the Hula Valley stands as one of Israel's most important ecological restoration successes. It shows that even heavily altered landscapes can regain function if pressure is reduced and processes are allowed to return. But it also shows limits. The original wetlands are gone. Some species never return, some changes are permanent. Restoration does not mean reversal, it means adaptation. The valley is no longer what it was centuries ago, but it is alive again. Life returned not because the land was forced, but because space was made. Water was slowed, nutrients were captured. Movement was restored. The Hula Valley was lost once by design. It came back by correction, and its story serves as a reminder that progress is not always about doing more. Sometimes it is about undoing just enough to let systems breathe again.